Hope everybody is doing well. It looks like we're about to have some cool weather down here in Durham, North Carolina. It is because of some possible bad weather that is coming this way, thunderstorms and all along those likes. I think that there are two hurricanes, because that's right, we are in the middle of hurricane season that may be impacting the weather. I know that Franklin was definitely doing some damage, and there was another storm that was coming up by Florida that may be impacting us as well. So that is something that is going on here, but it means that the temperatures are now in the mid 80s, and they might even get down to the 70s. So it is definitely some fall-like temperatures, and that is a good thing, because I know a lot of us here in North Carolina, we're getting tired of the hot summer-like weather. Because if you know anything about North Carolina, you also know that humidity is part of what goes on in that space as well. So definitely it is good to get a break in that sense, and to definitely have that going on, and to have some enjoyment time as well, where you can enjoy the weather, enjoy a nice walk. As a matter of fact, while waiting for a bus yesterday, I saw a gentleman that was walking his greyhound. That's right, he had a greyhound and was going out for a walk, and it looked like they were both enjoying that nice, lovely walk. Whereas there have been other times that I have gone out in the different parts of Durham, and the animals that were being walked, usually dogs, because cats ain't trying to be walked, even though there are some folks that attempt to do that. And all along those lines, they were looking like, hey, y'all can get me back in this house after we take care of whatever we got to take care of, because it's very hot in this particular environment. So I'm not trying to be out here in this fursuit and all along this lines. But in this particular case, the gentleman and his greyhound looked like they were having a nice casual walk, and I don't think that either were rushing to get back to their particular apartment. And I was actually at the Cultural Arts Center that I'll be going to later, because there is two churches that meet at the old converted church, because it was a church at one time in its history, but the Hayti Heritage Center has now been for several decades a performing arts center, catering mostly to the African American population, but definitely has some other groups that use the facility as well. But definitely it is a great venue, and there's all kinds of amazing things that happen there. As a matter of fact, there'll be a concert starring a young lady vocalist that'll be coming up that way this weekend. And of course, there were some kids, because there is an SAI, Summer Arts Intensive, that has been taking place. That is a program that is definitely helping some of our local kids. And they were actually learning, even though later they'll be learning about dance, theater, creative writing, and a number of other things. The first 2 weeks of this particular session, they were learning about STEAM and STEM. So they actually got to fly some drones. And I think last week they were actually dealing with robots. So they've had some amazing sense of great activities in that sense. And then on Saturday, I got a chance to go out in the park and hear people doing some very positive things, because there's an event called Black August in the Park that I think is a national event, but it is definitely a celebration of the African American culture. And a number of folks were out there enjoying the DJ music, even some old 70s and 80s type tunes where folks were getting their dance groove on, whether it was the percolator. And yes, I do remember what a percolator is, even though I'd be lying if I told you that I knew how to do the percolator, and I'd probably be injuring myself if I tried it as well. So I don't think that I'll be trying to percolate anytime soon. And even when the dance was popular, I don't know that I was trying to percolate during that time either. But that was one of the songs that I heard, and I heard a number of other classics as well, including Atomic Dog, which a lot of folks will know from George Clinton and the whole funk kind of life. And of course, there was some hip hop music and a number of other kind of danceable tunes that were out there. Some great food trucks, and I did get some Jamaican food while I was out there, and definitely enjoyed that, and definitely enjoyed the other kind of company that was out there. Not that many vendors, but there were some history things that were going on as well. So it was definitely a real fun event, and there were thousands of people out there. And on that particular day, even in the evening, it was a little bit on the warm side, because I think it was around, by the time I got there in the evening at 6, I want to say it was like 81 degrees. So 81 degrees at 6 p.m. is still a little bit on the warm side. That ought to tell you what it had been like in the earlier part of the day and all in that space because there was definitely some humidity in the air. But I'm going to get to my guests and see what they've got going on in their parts of the world. I know that Patricia Sprague is coming from Australia, Melbourne to be exact. And sometimes when we do our news show, one of our news people that comes on regularly comes in regularly from Sydney because I think that he's of has some Fijian background and has some other backgrounds as well. But y'all folks in Australia know Shaquille Latimer because of his greyhound racing and some of the other things that he is done and is on the news about for some of that on occasion and all along those lines. And I think he's also a hedge fund investor and a number of other things that give him some global notoriety and some global notice and all in that space. But he is a regular on our news show, which is at Monday through Fridays at 10 a.m. and all in that space. But I know that you're an author and a producer, so that means that you're probably in the film space as well, and also the founder of the Mindful Space Initiative. So first off, Patricia, how are you doing, and how is life treating you over there in Australia? Hope the weather is doing well, because like I said, it's doing better here, even though there might be some bad weather coming with the break in the weather as well.
Well, I'm actually envious that you've got warm weather. We actually got it's quite cool here at the moment. We're sort of still in the sort of cooler months of winter, and even when I was driving through Melbourne, it was pretty foggy because I actually live in the rural area and go into Melbourne quite a bit. So it was quite foggy yesterday morning, and it's 4 a.m. at the moment in at home, so it's a bit on the cool side. So yeah, it's good. I'm you, but I don't mind the cool weather as well.
Yeah, the cool weather can be nice, and like I said, it's not so much it's when it comes with the winds and all that kind of impact. Because I
Yeah,
know that
yeah.
not that long ago we had a very windy day. It wasn't like tornado like winds or anything along those lines, but it was still windy, and it knocked down one of my neighbor's trees that has actually moved to this particular apartment complex from Brazil, and it was a kind of surreal to see that very big tree laying on its side. Fortunately, we landed on the sideways versus the way heading toward the apartments, or the other way that might have been heading toward the electrical outlets and all in that space. So it had actually landed the way that it was causing least damage, but just to see that massive tree laying down as it was knocked down by the winds was definitely one of those surreal moments and all along those lines. I was just wondering as I was thinking about it, because I know one of the things that you're very big on is mindset, and I know that there is a active, and I saw your symbol that's on your necklace, and all along those lines, that there is an active indigenous population there in Australia, and I was just wondering if you were part of that culture, because I know that in my own family I have some
No,
folks that are Native American background and all in that space. So I was just curious whether that was where
no,
some of the mindfulness came from.
no, no. No. My background is my parents are Mauritian, and so they migrated to Australia back in the late '60s. And so my parents have been amazing. I mean, they have always given us choice and sort of control. I mean, when we were growing up, it was quite strict, but as time went on, I mean, they sort of gave us our freedom. And so I've been fortunate enough to go through some highs and lows in my life where, I've come to a point in my life where mindset and positive focus is really important to me. And so that's why I ended up writing my book and getting it out there and creating the Mindful Space Initiative as well as potentially, even though it's still in its startup stage, the Mindful Space Initiative. So it's still developing because I've got this massive vision and I'm trying to get everything into it. But it's going to be like a platform for anyone to go to. This is my aim, anyone to go to, and they will be able to discover other authors, speakers, coaches, trainers who are also sharing a message or a story about positive mindset or mindfulness, and sharing techniques, and hopefully uh, the Mindful Space Initiative ends up being a platform for people to showcase their work to the world, and hopefully people will be able to resonate to someone on the platform. And I've also developing an app, so hopefully to make it mobile so people can still discover people, as well as my own work as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. So I was
I
born in
appreciate it.
Australia. Yeah, so I was
Okay.
born here, but my parents are Mauritian.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Definitely that kind of background and everything. I know that the book there are is character driven. It seems like it's very character driven in the sense of there being a main character in the book. But I was wondering whether it is based on your own life or whether it is a fictional character that you are using other insights that you got from your own life in order to create the character, and how much of that is based
Yeah.
on your own reality.
Okay. It is a fictional novel. I've
Mhm.
actually written it from a male perspective, and the reason why I've done that is so people wouldn't go, "That's about her." It's actually it's. I wanted to make sure people clearly saw it as a fictional novel. But what I have done with the book, I've actually interweave techniques that I've incorporated in my life, and a different perspective on ways of looking at things. And I'm wanting people to stop and think and have their own self reflection and say, am I happy where I'm at? Do I need to make adjustments in my own life? And what was really wonderful, I recently gave the book to someone, and the feedback I got from my friend, because I haven't actually spoken to him yet directly, he's actually going through the book and highlighting pages, and I thought that is the biggest um, positive feedback for me, for someone to actually go highlighting parts of my book. And so the characters in the book are basically parts of me. So each character is there's bits of me in the book, and so I'm hoping that people can actually find some of the characters within the book relatable as well. As
No,
this main character goes on a journey of self reflection and discovery, and he then embarks on his finding his vision for basically his own life. And that's what I've done in my own life. I've embarked on my own. I went through a point in my life where I had to stop and pause because I was going through a crisis, and I used that time, instead of going, "Oh, I can't move forward," I actually used that time to actually go through self reflection and work out what worked in my life and what didn't work in my life. And I decided to have a bit of a list of all the things that did work in my life. And then I had this list and I incorporated it in the book. And I used that book, Kites and All Things, as a book for myself. So it wasn't actually originally planned to be published. It was actually for my eyes only. And so I promised myself, after I noticed I was actually having things change in my life in a really positive way. And I got to a point and I thought, if I get to do and be where I want to be, I will publish this book and share it with others. And I have this wonderful life. I've got, I live in a wonderful home. I have wonderful people around me who I consider wonderful friends and wonderful family around me. I have an amazing job. I work for, excuse me, I started working with a company which works around clients with psychosocial disability, and when I actually worked with this company, I was actually working directly with the clients, and in a very short time, I've become one of the managers, and it's because of this vision that I keep having for myself, and in within probably the last few years is now. Um, the Mindful Space Initiative is now, up and going, and the app is basically there. I'm still just tweaking it at the moment. So I just feel like this vision I have for myself is just unfolding before me. And so Kites and All Things is my sort of gift out there, with the techniques and the way I started looking at life. And I've interweaved that within the book.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. I know that here in the states, around the United States and other things, a lot of people are afraid to deal with their mental health. There are a lot of folks that aren't exactly rushing to go to the physical doctor, and they definitely have a issue when it comes to therapy. And there are certain societies that are more inclined to go than others, and all in that space. But I was just wondering if it is similar in Australia and other parts of the world that you have gone to, and do you feel that we do enough to address our mental health, or is it something that we are afraid to tackle in terms of making sure that we are well in that sense? Because I definitely think that we have to be well mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and a couple of the other principles that are out there as well. But I was just wondering, do you think we spend enough time addressing our mental well-being?
I think in the last few years, especially during COVID and coming out of COVID, there has been a real big focus here, at least in Australia, where the limelight is shining more and more on mental health and well-being. But I think so there's a focus there, which is brilliant. And I think there needs to be more conversation around it, and needs to be more out in the open. But what's the positive thing that's coming out of it is more and more people are actually coming forward and saying, they're struggling, they're not hiding it. And one of the things in my book is the importance of just reaching out and just saying, hey, I need help. We have a tendency to have this attitude that we should know how to fix everything in our life, and we don't. And so I think what's really important is to be able to say, you know what, instead of going through life completely frustrated and confused on how to address this particular area in my life, is to actually look for someone who actually specialized in that field, or who's been quite successful in that area, and reach out to them. I think you actually end up moving a lot faster and forward, instead of feeling stuck in a rut, because you just don't know how to address it. And if we put our hand up a lot more, I actually believe that um, people falling into a level of depression and anxiety, I'm not saying it will reduce it. What I am saying is that you're making yourself open to receiving the support or being connected to the right services earlier than waiting till you get to a crisis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm bringing our other guest very shortly as well. But one of the things is, a long time ago, because I went to school back in the 80s at Marquette in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and everything. And I remember writing a short story, because some of the journalism courses actually also had a creative writing focus as well. And one of them was a satire. And it was a satire where a gentleman was in a mental health facility. And at the end of the day, when he goes off and meets with Jefferson and Washington and some other folks that we know are not alive. So he's having that kind of like uh, belief in things that don't exactly exist. So a little bit of a neurosis is what I was kind of implying with the character. But the character was actually arguing with his counselor that he was pointing out some of the crazy things that we, as quote unquote, the same people, do in society. So at the end of the story, the question became whether our folks that are in politics and other business owners might be the ones that are actually the crazy ones, and the ones that are labeled as crazy are the ones that might be a little bit more on the sane side, because that was kind of the nature of the story and everything. And I do think that it had some merit then and some merit now as well, because sometimes when I hear our politicians that don't address these issues, I'm going like, maybe y'all are the ones that need help at all in that space. But I don't know if you would agree with that or
Is
not.
there So, Mark, is there a focus in the states around mental health, or is it still something that people don't really talk about?
It's become, like you said, during the pandemic. I think it became more of a focus. I'll bring in Brandon. He may have some thoughts around that as well. But I do think that there are a number of folks that are, while they are looking at mindfulness things like meditation and yoga and other things, they are oftentimes afraid to unravel the inner workings of their mindset and all along those lines. So I think a lot of people are very timid in that space because they're afraid of what they may discover about themselves, including some of their own stuff that is going on, whether that's around narcissism or whether that's around other issues that they may be facing and all along those lines. So I think that it is a focus. But one of the things, and I'd love to hear Brandon's thoughts about this, because I was on another show with another guest, and we were talking about physical education. There was a time, and I know Brandon has been in this space, that physical education and mental health were part of the school curriculum, and I don't think that they are as much a part of the school curriculum as they should be. As a matter of fact, I understand that there is a significant portion, a very sizable portion, I forget the exact figures that I found, that don't even have PE at this time and all along this line. So it is very much something that I feel our schools have pulled away from and all along those lines. But Brandon, if you want to jump in and share a little bit about your own background, and I do have some questions for both of you and Patricia along these lines. But if you want to jump in, because I do know that you are a Olympic champion, which is a good thing. We like to talk to Olympic champions and other folks. So I do know that you've had that pleasure and all along those lines. So definitely, if you'll jump in, just talking about the nature of the athletic situation and all in that space.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm not quite an Olympic champion, but I did get a couple of Big Ten championships coaching out at the University of Michigan for men's gymnastics. I was an athlete ever since I was 10 years old. So sports was always a huge, huge part of my life. And then after my sports chapter of my life was done, of course, I was an athlete for 14 years, from 10 to 24. Then I was a coach for a couple of years. And then I went down the coaching and motivational speaking route. But when I made that transition, I had what a lot of us former athletes call PTSD, post-traumatic sports disorder, right? Because I had that identity crisis of, oh, I've only done one thing my entire life. And now, everything shifted and changed for me. So I'm sure we can get into that a little bit later. But just to tap into that question a little bit, I think that sports really prepared me for life. The greatest teacher that I ever had in terms of mindset, in terms of positive thinking, in terms of resiliency and getting through adversity, that all came from my sports background, right? You have an injury in sports. It's not like you get to say, oh, I'm just going to sit here and wallow in self-pity. No, you got to figure out how to talk yourself back up. You got to figure out how to make a plan. You got to figure out how you can remain steadfast in your goals and keep that dedication as you go through that opposition and adversity. So sports was a huge teacher for me. And I think you're absolutely right about that point in the school system, at least here in the United States. We teach math when we have calculators, but we don't teach mental health, mental toughness, mental performance skills. We don't hardly teach physical education anymore. And there is no cheat code to that. There is no calculator for mental performance. There's no calculator for physical performance. And yet those are the things that we oftentimes neglect to teach our young people. And I think that that's easily reflected or clearly reflected rather in obesity rates and suicide rates and a lot of these challenges that we see in our country. I think a lot of that stems from those early years that we're neglecting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. One of the things I saw when I was researching, definitely Patricia, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, because it's an argument that I sometimes have with Shaquille, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier and everything, because I'm of the opinion that role models are important, and I know that not everybody believes that, and some people think that they can inspire themselves and be inspired by themselves and all along those lines. But I sometimes think that it is all right to have a role model, and all along those lines, I sometimes have a debate with Shaquille, because I'm basically like saying that it's all right to even like say that if you see somebody that looks like you become a success, that might make you want to go into the field. And I don't know that Shaquille always necessarily agrees with me on that, but I'm looking at like people that might say that they can become president now or vice president now because of what what definitely Kamala has done and what Barack did previously and all along those lines. I think that his argument is that you should want to inspire yourself. And I know one of the things that I read about you is that you, Patricia, is that you are not so much inspired by other people's lives, but as much as is your own personal growth. So I just wondered if you could speak to that, because I definitely think the role models are important, but I heard that quote, and I was wondering, what does that exactly mean?
Well, I am inspired by other people, and I do believe in role models. I do believe in having mentors, and as you grow, you find new other mentors to come into your life to keep you growing. But I'm also inspired by my own life because I I have my highs and lows, like everyone else, and the growth that I have seen in my own life. I'm inspired by that, and that whole thing about resilience and being focused and being committed and being disciplined to be committed to identifying a goal in your life and going for it. So yes, I believe in role models, and I believe in having very talented teachers come through your life and help you grow. But also, I think it's really important not to always be looking out there, but it's also acknowledging your own growth and your own success. And so I'm inspired by my own growth.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see that and everything, and definitely along those lines. Hey, Brandon, just out of curiosity, I was wondering, because when it comes to role models, there are a group of folks, and definitely the athletes are there, and there are other folks, including some of our entertainers, that are sometimes put in this position of having to be the voice of their community and all along those lines. And while I admire some of the work that LeBron James has done, and definitely I went to school there in Milwaukee with Doc Rivers, and I know that he was active in a lot in making comments around Black Lives Matter and a number of other issues, including even some thoughts around Colin Kaepernick and things. But I was just wondering, as a elite athlete yourself, what do you think the role is of athletes to speak to issues, or should they be speaking to issues, whether it is even one that you mentioned? Because I've heard a number of athletes that are concerned about the obesity level and would like to see more of our citizens getting in the exercise programs. And I know I need to do that and even get out there and get into some jogging and maybe some brisk walking and some other things, because I know that I could drop a few pounds here and there as well.
Well, hey, you said earlier you were going on a walk yesterday, so that is already more than a lot of people. So you're taking the first step. So I can't knock that at all. Really quickly, just to speak to something that Patricia just spoke to in terms of role models versus being inspired by yourself. I think that oftentimes when we are inspired by some of these role models or public figures, we're inspired by them because they display excellence, and we know that deep down we have a part of that excellence as part of our essence as well. We see what we're capable of in them. Now, we also see in the reflection of their excellence, we see what we have yet to actualize yet within ourselves. And so oftentimes that can be a struggle because we're inspired by what they're able to do, but then we look at ourselves and say, but how come I haven't done X, Y, and Z yet, right? So I think it's this really tough balance to strike, and to do it right and to get it healthy. You've got to be inspired by other people, but you also have to be inspired by your own potential, right? And eventually, if you do that long enough and you start taking step after step after step, one step at a time, eventually you have what Alex Hormozy calls his undeniable stack of proof. The evidence of, well, look what I have gotten through. Look what I have overcome. Look at what I have been able to accomplish. And now all of a sudden you can point back to that and say, you know what? Doggone it, I am inspired by myself. Look at me. Look at all the stuff that I've been able to do, right? But oftentimes it starts by looking outward, and then in what we see in them, we see a reflection of ourselves. Then we can get the ball rolling and then become inspired by ourselves. So I just thought that was a really, really great point that you made, Patricia. But to your question about role models and leadership and the example that you're supposed to set, I think that athletes and entertainers and anybody else in the public eye, there's a certain obligation and responsibility that comes with that, right? Because if you are going to be placed in a position, and sometimes it's not necessarily of our own doing, we may have just been following our own dreams, passions, and what we love to do. And then one day you end up in a place where you have thousands or even millions of people looking to you to set an example. But to be honest with you, that's just a magnified version of what every single one of us goes through every day. I don't care who you are or what position in society that you hold. Somebody watches the way that you move. Somebody watches the way that you deal with adversity. Somebody watches the way that you interact with other people. Somebody watches the way that you handle situations of conflict and controversy, right? And so that might be a child. It might be your neighbor. That might be anybody who follows you on social media, who watches a show like yours. People are watching people. Period, no matter who you are. And so I always encourage people that, hey, you might not want to be a leader. You might not want to be in the spotlight. You didn't have a choice. You're on planet Earth. People watch you, and the example that you set has a ripple effect on how other people make decisions and go about their lives. So I think that while it can seem like a lot of pressure, it is nothing more than a magnification of what every human being has a right and a responsibility and an obligation to do, which is set a good example for the neighbor next to them.
Hey, Brandon, along those same lines, and I know that you've got some pretty good numbers, and I think Patricia probably does as well. How do you recognize what kind of impact you are having and everything? Because I'll just give the example. When I stopped by, I saw a longtime friend, and I would say that he is somewhat of a mentor in some aspects as well, because he's definitely been doing some stuff in the religious community and the civil rights community. But I ran into my buddy Carl Kinney, and he was like saying that I've been watching your shows, been catching your shows. And I'm going like, well, I never hear you make any comments, so I didn't know that you were actually watching and all in that space. And I have seen some of your numbers that are in some cases the multiple thousands, if not the tens of thousands. So at what point do you realize you're making an impact, and how do you use that influence that you have? Because I've sometimes even wonder whether it's this or other shows, how much are we actually reaching people? But then I come up with the attitude that if I reach one person and one person learns and one person gets some knowledge from it, then I have done my job on that particular day. But I do know a lot of people get caught up in the numbers game and all in that space. So I was just wondering, is it something that you even pay attention to? Because I'm going like, hey, and it's a term that I hate, but I've been called an influencer, and I know you've been called an influencer, but I don't know that I have 50 million views, which apparently you have on social media, but I also don't know how they count those views either. And so maybe I do have 50 million views and can rank up there with you and all along those lines, but I oftentimes am confused as to how they even get those numbers. But if you have any thoughts, then definitely share them with us and the network.
100%. I think that if you get caught up in the numbers, you get distracted from the mission. I think that as soon as you allow your insecurity to overcome your anointing, you become an agent of self instead of an agent of change. What I mean by that is if you are focused more on how other people see and affect you as opposed to how you affect other people, then all of a sudden we let that insecurity jump in there. And now we're making decisions that aren't even really in alignment with who we are, just because we're trying to appease somebody or we're trying to get likes on Instagram. And that now we're completely distracted from the actual mission at hand, right? I give you a quick story. When I was 16 years old, I was listening to a man named Dr. Eric Thomas, #1 motivational speaker in the world. I'm his agent now 10 years later, but 10 years ago, I was listening to him on a YouTube video. And I was 16. I was in charge of a small group of kids who were about my age, 14, 15 years old. And we were at a gymnastics camp together. And our job was to clean the camp. We were basically a bunch of kids who come from families who couldn't afford the tuition at that gymnastics camp on a weekly basis. And so we all went there and we worked and we cleaned and we washed dishes and cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors in exchange for a break in our tuition. And I was in charge of that little group of people. There were probably 7 or 8 of us. And I took one of Eric Thomas's speech. I remixed it. It was the most Walmart brand, terrible motivational speech you've ever heard in your life. It was trash. And I remixed what ET said on YouTube, and I gave it to these 6 or 7 kids that I was in charge of. 2 days later, one of them walks up to me, hands me a note, didn't say a word, walked away. I opened up the note, and it said, for the last 9 months, I've been considering suicide because I've been so depressed. And what you said the other night really changed my outlook on life. I just wanted to thank you. And so for me, we can sit here all day talking about 50 million views over here on stage in front of thousands of people over here. It's irrelevant. Why am I going to look at metrics on a screen when I got that note? I still got it somewhere in this office today, as a matter of fact. That's the metric of success that we should be measuring ourselves by. And you might not have a note, you might not have a personal anecdote like that, but I'm telling you, if you can affect the way that one individual sees their lives, sees their mission, sees their purpose, and how they make decisions and carry themselves on this earth, you have done enough. Because that individual, like you said, they might go into their next interaction. They might go talk to their mother a different way, or their friend a different way, or their student or their coach or whoever else in a different way because of an effect that you had on them. And that butterfly effect can proliferate throughout time, throughout generations even. And so if we start getting caught up over numbers, I think it distracts from the mission. I think that if we focus on being the best example of actualizing the potential that we've been blessed with, and we teach other people how to do that too, that's all that we can do. That's all we're called to do. That's all we're asked to do. It's as much as we can do, and we ought to be darn happy about it.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. And that is a very powerful statement that you just made and everything. I was actually reflecting on another short story that I wrote some time back and everything. I need to find out where these stories actually live and all along those lines. But it was actually a story that was similar to what you just said, because a lot of times the people that can teach us the most are people that are observant, but that we don't oftentimes pay enough attention to, and all in that space. So it's actually called Confessions of a Puppy. And anybody that knows of during the times of that whole Wall Street era and everything, and there was the yuppies, well, there was the buppies, which were the black urban professionals as well. And it was a gentleman that got caught up in a situation where he couldn't get to his car, so he wound up catching the bus. And on the bus ride, he ran into a person that was going through homelessness. He ran into, I think, a person that was dealing with drug abuse. And then at the end, he actually got some very serious lessons about the corporation that he worked for by talking to the janitor, because he had to actually reach out and have a actual one-on-one conversation with the janitor, because a lot of times the janitors are the people that know a lot about the corporations, including where the bodies are buried and where some of the decisions are made and how they are made, but and sometimes even where the documents that folks don't want to see are found, because oftentimes they're found in the trash and all along those lines. So that was kind of the point of the story, is that we need to actually listen to people and pay attention to people, including those that are considered quote unquote lesser than thee, even though I hate that terminology, and all along those lines. And I actually had one of those moments yesterday, because I went to grab a bite to eat at KFC, and they were short staffed. I could tell that they were short staffed. There were a number of us, maybe like about, not tons of us, 10 or 15, that had to wait a long time for our order to get fixed and everything. And then we got it and enjoyed it, but we could have been in a very negative space and got all gripey and been sitting there yelling and everything. But I think that everybody recognized what was going on and recognized that this was a time that you just needed to be patient. And sometimes patience is a virtue that we don't teach enough in the society. So like I said, I could have sat there and yelled all day long, but at the end, would it have accomplished anything? So I just was going to patiently wait. Some people opted to leave and go to another place, but I just opted to stay, as did the other folks, and we eventually got our order. It was a good order and all in that space, but sometimes that patience is needed as well. So that's just something I don't think that we do enough of, is exercising patience. And speaking of exercising patience, and this is actually a question for you, Patricia, and all, I know that there are a number of times that folks are dealing with different situations and different disabilities and all along those lines, but too often we don't recognize what people are going through, and we make assumptions and all in that space. And I know that you have stated on a couple of things that I've read about you, that you had your reading and writing difficulties as a child and even as an adult, and now you've written a book. Hey, that's what a lot of people would say. How did she manage to do that? But then again, we also, no matter what you think of him politically, we also have a political leader that is currently the president that speaks with a stutter. And sometimes folks don't realize that that is what is going on and all along those lines. And that's not to forgive anything that he's doing in terms of policy, because that's a whole separate conversation that we can get into if we choose to or not. But I do think that sometimes people don't recognize that he is fighting a stutter when he has some of those verbal lapses and all along those lines. And it's something he's been dealing with forever, and he's a lifetime politician. So I just wondering your thoughts around dealing with these adversities that you had to face. And like I said, you've written a book, and I know somebody else that was a stutterer, I think they were, and now they're like one of the top motivational speakers. I wish I could think of the gentleman's name, but they are one of the top motivational speakers in the country, even though they still speak with a stutter and all along those lines.
I think for me, Kites and All Things was actually, as I said to you earlier, was actually for my eyes only. It was it was my way of practicing writing, and it just evolved. But one of the things for me was stopping the negative self-talk around my lack of confidence around reading and writing, and also for me, and I will say to anyone who has any challenges around reading and writing, is learning to identify the best way you learn, because some people learn from doing, others learn from listening, others learn from watching. And so for me, it was learning what's the best way, how do I learn? And once I understood how I was able to learn certain things, then I would modify and tweak the way I did things in line with the way my learning style. And so I found, reading a lot easier, writing a lot easier. But I also leaned into my husband quite a bit. And so he played a large part in sort of reading my stuff and going, that doesn't make sense, Trish, and and I'll just go back and go and continue to practice basically. And it's one of those things. It's setting a goal. That was one of my goals, was just to improve my writing, and then doing a little bit of an exercise each day, and it could be, if it wasn't every day, it would be every few days. But it's that focus. It's like, if I always believe, if something is holding you back, it could be the very thing that makes you shine. And so, to me, it's one of those things where it was the most embarrassing thing for me for a long time, and I just made a decision. I'm not going to allow this to embarrass me anymore. I'm going to actually address this, and and I just made it a goal to work on it every day. So that's where I'm at now.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And this is actually for both of you. And I'd love to hear Brandon's thoughts about this. But I've been helping a friend of mine with their Audible. They actually have written a book that deals with their dealings with their son and some of their other kids that they have and everything, because definitely they have had to learn how to deal with the different learning styles and all in that space. So Kelly Jones has written a book and I've been helping her with that. But part of what we've been talking about in her book is the notion of omniverts, ambiverts, extroverts, and there is a third one and everything: introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, and omniverts. And I sometimes don't think that the schools do enough job of, one, recognizing that everybody has a different learning style, which is what Patricia just alluded to, and making sure that they are teaching to those different styles. Because I think that sometimes we have a one size fits all kind of way of teaching.
Yeah.
And like I said, she has definitely been involved in the whole thing around pandas and pans, and is of the belief that a lot of what goes on where we are diagnosing people and giving them drugs and everything like Ritalin and everything can actually be addressed if we would recognize what is going on with their mind and take action in that space. And in some cases, there might even be some medicines that can help in that process, but it doesn't have to be always be the over medication that also goes on as well. Because I personally am of the opinion that I've got two nephews that all kids to some degree are hyper, but definitely I think we'd have to also understand their different styles of learning as well, kind of what Patricia was alluding to.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Mark, is the fact that sometimes we have people, they present themselves with certain behaviors which would not be considered acceptable, and it's because this one size fit all approach, especially around learning, we've got a lot of kids falling to the side, and they're not getting the same level of attention. They're not moving forward and learning, and so they're behaving in a certain way. And so it's looking at children and even young adults and saying, hang on, everyone has their own unique way of processing information. And so it's just spending, and it doesn't have to be like hours and hours, but it's spending some time just learning and understanding that individual and understanding their style.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I love to hear Brandon's thoughts, because I think that one of the greatest things that happened to my nephews, because I don't have any kids of my own, but I have my two nephews that have turned 14 and 15 into this particular month that we are in and everything, meaning the month of August, was at a very young age, because my dad is an artist and also an activist, and he's done a number of other things in life, including media and all in that space, and even teaching media at UNC before he retired. Was that he had them actually learning and touching at a very young age. I want to say that they were almost like just past the infant stage when he was showing them, and you mentioned the walk earlier, showing them things around nature, whether that was leaves, whether that was different animals, and a number of other things. And I think that curiosity is something that they still have to this day. And I know that there are some folks that will argue that you shouldn't be teaching them those kind of things at such a young age, because there are some that believe that the brain hasn't developed enough in order to learn those things. But I don't necessarily buy that philosophy, because I think that if you introduce them at a young age to things, that it can be very beneficial to their long-term life and all in that space. But Brandon, you were in athletics. I was just wondering, were you one of those people that was doing observational learning at a very young age, and were you being physically active at a very young age as well?
Well, so my athletics career was a little bit different from most athletes, even for most gymnasts. I started gymnastics at the age of 10 years old. I didn't compete until I was 16 years old. And most guys that do my sport who make it to that Division 1 level or beyond, they're usually starting the sport at 3 and competing at 5, 6, 7 years old. So I had a little bit of a late start. I was always naturally strong, but I was never super gifted, I would say. Matter of fact, I never even remember why I started gymnastics in the first place. I never had any family members who did it. I never saw it on TV. It was truly one of those things that just, it found me. I didn't find it. And I went to my parents one day when I was 9 years old and said, hey, I really want to try this crazy sport and I want to do some flips. And then they actually told me no because they thought it was too dangerous. And then another year went by, and then I started trying to walk on my hands around the house. My parents said, before he gets killed, why don't we go enroll him in some classes? So I think it was in me more so than me necessarily getting any exposure early on. But really quickly to touch on that point about the shotgun approach, I always tell people that if you take a shotgun approach, you might hit the target, but how much collateral damage are you going to cause in the process? Right. And so you talked about my sports career. I was blessed to have a coach who immediately understood that I was an introvert. I'm an introvert to my core. Now, I've learned and developed skill sets to appear more extroverted, right? Because I'm a speaker, so I have to on stage. But at my core, naturally, I'm very much an introvert. I recharge by being alone. I prefer step-by-step processes. I prefer details as opposed to big picture and energy. And I'm very introverted by nature. And my coach knew that. And so he was able to go to another athlete who might have been very extroverted and give him a hype speech. He could pump him up. He could kind of get in his face a little bit and say, hey, here's what we got to do. He could come to me and say, okay, what you did was you were 3 degrees off on your handstand. I need you to make this minute adjustment. And he knew that if he said that to the extroverted kid, he was going to be like, what are you talking about? And he knew that if he came to me with some kind of motivational speech, I was going to be like, I don't need this. What are you talking about? And so he knew how to adjust his communication per individual that he was coaching or speaking to. And I think that's what made him a great coach. And honestly, I think that helped develop my success for a really long time. And to your point of using that methodology and that idea in the school system, you look no further than me and Eric Thomas, right? Eric Thomas is a super, super extrovert. If you've ever heard any of his keynote speeches, I mean, he is off the walls energetic. And guess what his report card said when he was in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade? He talks too much. Guess what? He gets paid 6 figures for 45 minutes to go talk too much. Kevin Hart, same story. Saw a interview with him not too long ago. I always got in trouble for cracking jokes. He makes millions of dollars for cracking jokes. Nobody in the school system showed him at an early age, here's how you can harness this. Now we got to give you some situational awareness because this is not the time or place to be cracking jokes, but let me show you how to use this productively, because even though you might be getting told that this is a negative thing, it's actually your superpower in disguise. For me, being very detail oriented, step by step, yes, I can speak. I've developed the skill set, but my natural proficiency is really outlining things. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. So I write all of Eric Thomas's slides. So he gets the energy on stage. He gets my step-by-step frameworks on the slides. We come together. We learn how to take his superpower and my superpower, bring them together to create something that neither one of us could create on our own. But to your point, if we're not educated and we just think something's wrong with us because I am quiet and introverted or because I am loud and talkative, now we're sitting here being insecure about ourselves rather than unleashing that superpower that we have on the world. And I think if more people would learn to embrace that, we'd be in a better spot.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. I do have to teach you about something about the gymnastics. I'll get to a story based on that and everything. But you know that really you were going into gymnastics because you were trying to get with the young ladies of the time and all along those lines. Because we do know that there were some very attractive ladies, just like there's some very attractive ladies now that are involved in that sport. So we know that that was the real reason you were going into it. But I was going to actually bring up along those same lines a story that is similar, because I am a horrible track runner. I ran track in high school. I knew I was bad, even though I had vision of running the Olympics or even being a marathon runner or a number of other things. But I also recognize skill sets that I have even at a young age, and having parents that decided to start a radio station when I was a teenager or a preteen at the earliest, and all along those lines, I've definitely been in the media space and the space of talking and being able to have good conversations and all along those lines. So I use that skill, which I still use to this day, because I am very much of a positive networker and do a lot of networking both for the Cultural Arts Center that I work at is a number of other places. So I literally made sure that we had a championship team by going and reaching out to the football players, reaching out to the basketball players, and making sure that they would be participating again every year in the track team. So being almost like a side coach, for lack of a better term. Ironically, it was my senior year that I got tired of losing because remember, I just told y'all I was Charlie Brown and everything. So I recruited a friend that I knew I could beat. So we were champions for 3 of my 4 years. The senior year, I actually recruited a friend who unfortunately has passed away several decades ago. But that's because I knew I could beat Jimmy Robinson. And I think we lost because we didn't have anybody that could do the pole vault or a number of other things. And Brandon, I would be lying if I said that part of the reason that I wanted to go on the track team was I had a crush on 2 of the cheerleaders who also happened to be the scorekeepers as well. So I would know.
Just so happened to be the scorekeeper. Just so happened to be.
It just happened to be the scorekeepers and all of that. So I had that serious crush on them. And while I can be very extroverted in some things, I can also be very introverted in other things. So I can still sometimes have what people call girl shyness or shyness in those kind of social environments. So that does go on even to this particular day, even at the age of 61. But definitely that was the reason I was going there, because I was like, hey, maybe I will actually make this mouth work and go and talk to them and all in that space. But there's that notion of fear of failure, which I'm sure that both of y'all are also aware of as well. So I'd love to hear y'all thoughts about how you deal with that, because that's something that we talk about on this show and other shows on the network, is that imposter syndrome and also that inner critic. Because I do know that a lot of times we will sit there and have those conversations with ourselves. I know I've even done it going for jobs, like a program director or a management job in the entertainment field, and I'd be like, I can do that job, and then I say to myself, I can't do that job, I can do that job, and have this conversation with yourself that goes on for about a week, and then you finally go and learn what the job is, and the job is gone. That's where the job is gone, and all in that space. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about that, because I know I've had several of those inner conversations over several decades, whether it's over romance or whether it's over a career. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts and how y'all get past that inner critic.
Ladies first, please.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Brandon. Well, basically, with that whole thing of, fear of failure, I mean, I don't think of failure. I think of feedback. And so the only way to get feedback is to actually do something to get that feedback. And so I don't actually, probably a long time ago, I would be stuck and not wanting to do things because I was too scared of rejection or fear of failure. But now I just give it a go. And I know whatever I put out, I will get some form of feedback. And that will be either it's positive feedback and I'm in the right direction, or it's feedback where I just need to make adjustments, or it's feedback I'm not ready for it. It's okay. But I don't see failure as a negative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about your thoughts about that, Brandon? If I can just add a twist to the conversation, I also know that in addition to the inner critic, there are those outer critics. And I sometimes think that we get caught up in analysis paralysis, where we're sitting there trying to analyze why people are doing what they're doing and why they are giving us the negative feedback. And in some cases, it might be, to what you just said, Patricia, something that can be helpful and beneficial. But I do know that sometimes we are so busy analyzing it that we are stopping ourselves from moving forward. And I know that athletes can be very notorious for that and all in that space.
But I think so. I think a large part of it is we're making assumptions about what other people are thinking, and the reality is they're not even thinking that, but we're imposing what we believe they may be thinking about. But the way I look at it is just step forward and see what sort of feedback you get. And the reality is you may be walking in a direction where your path is revealing itself and you're on the right path, or maybe no, this is not. Start backing out. I'd make the adjustment, have a look at what your other options are. But being paralyzed by not taking a step forward because of fear of failure or what you believe other people are thinking, you end up in a situation where you just don't move. You procrastinate basically.
Yeah. So to Patricia's point, failure does not equal death unless you're skydiving. If you're skydiving, you can be afraid of failure. Other than that, failure is feedback. It's not going to kill you. So I don't know why people are so like we have these systems in our brain that are biologically wired to try and keep us safe. We're wired for safety and not success. And so oftentimes that fear of failure is truly just an illusion based on, again, to Patricia's point, assumptions that we're making that are not founded or based in any sort of factual information. And so we have to allow our higher consciousness to jump in and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Failure is not going to kill us. That's number one. Number two, it ain't about you. If you are concerned about how other people's opinions are going to affect you based on your success or your failure, then it shows a level of conceitment and self-absorption. And that means that whatever you're doing it for the wrong reasons anyway, right? The reality is most people are not paying attention to you. And that is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just the way that the world works. I remember one of my very first competitions ever. I was 16 years old, and I was on pommel horse, notorious for being the most difficult event in men's gymnastics. And I fell not once, not twice, 3 times. I fell on, and this is like the second routine I've ever done in front of judges and audience, the second routine I've ever done ever in my career. And it completely bombed, just 3 falls back to back to back. And I remember I was so upset about it. I was crying in the car on the way home. And eventually my mom had enough. And she said, son, I love you. We're going to support you through this. But the only people who are going to remember what happened today are you, your coach, your dad, and myself. Nobody else is going home thinking about, yeah, that Brandon kid sucked on pommel horse. He was terrible. Let's talk about him all night long. People aren't doing that. It's not about you. So let it go. Number 3. One of my undergrad degrees from Michigan was in psychology, and they told us about this study that was done many years ago where they put a rat in a cage and they tied a string to its tail, and the other end of that string was tied to a force meter so they could tell how hard the rat was pulling in the opposite direction, and that how hard it pulled was a proxy for its level of motivation, right? And what they did was they put some food on the opposite side of the cage. And so they could measure how hard it pulled in an effort, in an attempt to get to the food that was on the other side. And they got a certain reading, a certain number of the force that it was exerting. And then they kept the food on that side and they sprayed the smell of a cat behind it. So now it was running towards something that it desired and away from something that it was afraid of. And it not only doubled, it more than doubled. And so what that tells us is that having a desire is not enough. Everybody wants to make $1 million. Everybody wants a yacht in the Bahamas. Everybody wants a vacation. Everybody wants to work less, make more. Everybody wants something. And the fact that you can go up to anybody in America or probably Australia or anywhere in the world and say, hey, what do you want? They're probably going to give you an answer. That should be evidence in and of itself that having a desire or wanting something is not enough to overcome many of the hurdles and obstacles that are placed between your current reality and the state or the outcome that you hope to one day achieve. We need a little bit of that. What are we running away from? What are we afraid of that we are not willing to let happen? That's important. And so for me, it is dying with potential left on the table. It scares me to my core. I'm so bothered by the idea of getting to the end of my life and leaving chips on the table, having not accomplished all that I could accomplish, having not become all that I could have become, having not impacted all the people that I could have impacted. That bothers me enough to get me over that hump of inaction. And so I think that if people are afraid of failure, maybe you should try being afraid of something else that's a little bit bigger, that's a little bit more serious than failure. And I think that can change people's perspectives and get them to take action, even in the face of fear.
No, as you were saying, I was actually thinking about a show that I produced, which is actually Billy Graham's show. It's here on the network as well. But he is a motivational speaker. He has spoken about to a number of places, mostly in Africa and definitely here in the United States as well. He's based there in Texas. But if you hear his sizzle reel, one of the things that he says on his sizzle reel is that the cemeteries are filled with brilliant ideas and that he does not want to leave any of those brilliant ideas here on earth. He'd rather take them with him when he leaves and all in that space, because there are tons of brilliant ideas that are in the cemeteries because nobody acted on those ideas and they went to the grave with them, is the core of what that message is. And I probably have kind of twisted the quote around, but you get the gist of what the overall quote is and all along those lines.
But another motivating thought is if I don't do anything different and just continue with what I'm doing now, what would it look like in 10 years? And that can be a real good motivator for you to go, you know what? I don't want to be here doing the same thing in 10 years' time. I want to make something of a shift. And that can sometimes be a good motivator by just looking into the future if you don't make any changes now.
I love that. And Mark, I would just ask this to anybody in the audience who listens to that, right? You already are not where you want to be. Like if you're even having this mental conversation with yourself, it means that your current reality is here and your desired outcome is here. There's a gap between the two. What you afraid of? If you fail, you're going to be exactly where you are. Right. So if you already don't like the place that you're at, then you don't have a whole lot to lose. Now, I'm not saying you should go take a bunch of crazy risks and go gamble your life away in Vegas and go bankrupt. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is the fear should hold a lot less weight in your mental equation here because you are already in a state of pain or aggravation. It is worth at least trying to get out of that rather than being stifled or paralyzed by a fear that may or may not have. The fear is not even real yet, but your current reality is absolutely real, and that should be motive enough for you to start taking action.
Hey, Brandon, along those same lines, and I know that there is a conversation that goes on with a certain kind of parent, but I've also seen it in the business lanes as well. How important do you think it is to be real to your own dreams and everything? Because I know that there are a number of times that people will try to pull you into their dream. I mean, you are definitely working with Eric and y'all are working as a team and everything, but I do know that sometimes people will try to hijack your dreams. And we've definitely seen that in athletics where you will have the helicopter parents and all of those kind of folks that maybe they wanted to be the football star of their day. So they are trying to exercise that reality through their kids because maybe they didn't make it to the NFL. So they're going to try to make sure that their kid makes it to the NFL to live their dream, even though that may not even be the kid's dream. The kid might want to go and be a top ranked chef or something along those lines, but they are trying to do that people pleasing thing because I do know that sometimes we are wanting to people please some of our allies as well. So I was wondering how both of you get past that and get out of that notion, because I know that I've even been approached by people that have a wonderful vision and I'm making to be supportive of the vision, but I also have to sometimes set boundaries to let them know that that is their dream, not necessarily my dream, and I can be supportive of their dream, but I also have my own visions that I have that I want to go on, and it may not be always parallel and all in that space. But I was just wondering how both of you deal with that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, you can bring me a dream and a vision and I can support you and love you through the entire thing. But if it's not mine, I may or may not be able to go along with you because I've got to stay true to my own dreams and my own goals. I mean, the reality is this: you will never, ever be happy trying to be a second-rate version of somebody else. You're never going to be happy if you pick an arbitrary dream that was given to you by somebody else. Even if you accomplish it, it's still not going to be nearly as fulfilling as what you may have hoped or thought because it wasn't yours to begin with, right? And to be completely honest with you, Mark, I fell into that trap earlier in my life, right? These championship rings right here, those are as a coach. These are not as an athlete. These are as a coach. Now, I was a very good athlete, but I knew from a very young age, I never wanted to compete. I never wanted to be Michael Jordan. I never wanted to be Michael Jordan. I wanted to be Phil Jackson. That's who I was. I was a far better coach than I was an athlete. But when you get on campus and all of a sudden you start getting treated like a student athlete, people see you as somebody, you're important, you fall into that. You're like, oh, okay, now I gotta adhere to this character that somebody else gave me, because when I got to college at 18 years old, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I stood for. And if you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. So I didn't even know who I was. And so that opened the door and made me vulnerable to allow somebody else to tell me who I was, which is a super dangerous place to be in. So that's why I always tell young people, listen, if you can figure out who you are and what you want out of life, you're so far ahead of everybody else. Don't worry about no grades. Go figure out who you are and what you want. And that's what is important, because that will give you a basis and a foundation of which to make decisions off of. Now you have a benchmark. Here's my values. Here's my goals. I can make decisions based on whether or not they are in alignment with this, right? That's what's important. And that's what's going to set you up for the rest of your life. But the point is this: I was trying so hard to be that alpha male athlete persona when I knew deep down that it wasn't me. And so what did that look like in my day-to-day life? I was anxious. I did not enjoy going to practice for the sport that I loved and dedicated my life to. There were days I didn't want to show up because I was too concerned about, am I going to make lineup? Am I going to make this competition? Am I going to score well? I didn't like to compete. That's not my personality. I like to dig into the details. I like to coach. I like to train. I like to practice, but I don't like competing. And so the entire time of my college career, I knew I was a better coach. And here's the crazy part. As soon as I stopped being an athlete, I bumped my head against the wall for 4 or 5 years as an athlete. And again, I got really, really good at the craft, but I don't have any medals to show for it. Don't have any trophies to show for it. The first year coaching, let's see, that's this one actually. Very first year coaching, Big Ten championship. Second year ever coaching, anybody, anything, Big Ten championship. I wish I could sit here and tell you that my effort level did not change, but my success did. The truth is, Mark, my effort level went down. I didn't have to work as hard at coaching as I did at being an athlete, and I was still 10 times more successful. So if somebody is trying to place a dream on you, don't have that hesitation that I had of trying to conform, trying to be liked, because again, you cannot take other people's opinions to the bank, or you can't take them to the grave. You're not going to take them to heaven with you. You're not going to take them to the bank and cash no check and pay a bill. So stop caring about them. Focus on your dreams, your goals, what you want to do. And the crazy thing about it is you will gain more friends and more respect by doing that than you will by trying to conform. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be renewed by the transforming of your mind. People respect that. People respect people who stand for something. People respect people who have a vision, who know what they want. And the more you run from that, the further and further from your calling and purpose you become.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. As you were saying that, I was actually thinking about a cousin of mine who was a coach on the football level, and now he is kind of the athletic director. And I know that sometimes it is hard to switch roles and all along those lines, because I know that there are times that he is tempted to go down there and to coach and do the coaching that he was so passionate about. He definitely had a passion for his athletes and everything. But I also know that there are divisions of power that exist and even exist in the school system. So the coach would not appreciate it, and I don't think that the administration would appreciate it as well. So he did have to, as you talk about transformative, he had to learn those kind of like shifting realities, that he couldn't go down there and make the plays for the coach and all of that, because he had a new responsibility that was going to include not just football, which he is very passionate about, but also the other aspects of the other athletic endeavors that particular high school has, and all in that way. And he had to be fair to all of the different coaches, not just the coaches that he was involved in, meaning the football team. I think he might have done some stuff with wrestling and basketball as well, but he had to make sure that, if there was a fencing team, that they were covered as well, and all in that space. But it is sometimes difficult for us to adjust to our new realities and all in that space, because that is something that is a frustration for many folks, and all along those lines is that they want to adjust and advance, but then they also are feeling that they are losing some things in that space as well. Patricia, just really quickly, you kind of alluded to it, but why did you call it kites of all things? And do you have like a love of kites? Because I know that as a kid, I used to love kites as well. It's definitely a amazing thing to fly. And I actually remember flying with my dad, some of the bigger ones that are very complicated to fly and all along those lines. But when I saw that title in first read about you, I was going like, we got to ask her about the kites and why she opted to call it kites of all things, and whether you had a love of kites as a kid.
Kites do feature in the books, but I have a very fond memory, like yourself, of childhood, and I have a very fond memory of my dad. We was under the carport, and my dad was teaching us how to make kites, and so that's a very fond memory for me. And so I decided to feature kites in the book. But yeah, that's the only thing that I can remember of kites, is that moment with my dad and all of us kids building kites, making kites, I should say, under the carport at home. So yeah.
Yeah. And you alluded to it earlier, Patricia, but I was just wondering, because I know it's getting late there, and then we'll wrap up in a few more minutes and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, because you definitely have had some real thoughts, and we kind of alluded to it, but you have a husband. I imagine y'all may have kids as well. But how do you do, because we talked about this on the network quite a bit as well, that balancing of life and family, and even some of these new projects, because you're still even working to this day as well. So
Mhm.
you're balancing both your regular career as well and with your regular job. Because to me, a job and a career are two different
Yeah.
things. A job is what you do
Um,
to pay the bills.
the thing is, like, with Mindful Space Initiative, writing the book, working on the app, all those things don't feel like a job, because it's my vision. I I am literally, the path continues to, light up for me. It doesn't feel like hard work, So for me, it's an absolute pleasure to actually be working on these things. So working during the day as in the mental health field can be quite draining and can be taxing at time. And but then coming home, I don't have little children. I've got a son who's he's much older now with his own family. But it's coming home, having a meal, and we're doing our own thing. Sometimes we're together, we're watching TV, and I could be working on my stuff, but it doesn't feel like work because I love it. And I think when you find something that you love and enjoy and is your passion, it's not hard work. It's a joy. And for me, I could actually be up till 2 o'clock in the morning and then have to get into the car, in the early hours of the morning to go to Melbourne, and I don't feel like I'm drained or anything like that because I have just been wrapped up. I've been absorbed into what I love doing. So yeah, balance. It's easy because it doesn't feel like hard work.
It sounds like you've got a great attitude in that space and everything. Just out of curiosity, is there anything that you have learned from your work in the mental health field that you bring into the entrepreneurial lane, whether that is learning from the patients that you've worked with, or whether it's learning from coworkers or a number of other environments that you are able to bring into your entrepreneurial journey?
Um, from my perspective, is I check in on myself. It's one of the things I check in on how I'm going. Am I starting to feel fatigued? Do I need to just pull back a little bit, give myself some time to rest? The tendency, especially in our role, is one of the things we do is check in. We check in on how people are progressing, and so I do that with myself. I go, I'm not well. I will stop my activities to give myself enough time to rest and recover. Or, I'm feeling fatigue. Just don't go to bed at 1 o'clock. Go to bed at 11:30. Things like that. And so for me, is a check-in on myself and saying how I'm traveling, is really important, because this is a passion for myself. But it is I'm spending quite a bit of evening hours focusing on this, so I need to make sure that I'm well and full of energy when I go to work the next day. So, but I'm always regularly checking in on myself, and I think it's really important for people who uh, are looking at running a business or are running a business, is that they do check in on themselves, and make sure that they're, physically they're well, emotionally they're well, mentally they're well, and spiritually they're giving themselves some time to meditate or go for a walk in the park, or just get out and just spend some time with nature, or with yourself, to ensure that you still continue to know yourself.
And speaking of knowing yourself, and this is for both you and Brandon, during the pandemic, and I actually need to reach back out to IPC because it was a project that was based on Clubhouse and everything along those lines. But I was, for about a year, maybe a year and a half, involved with the Funky Eye Puppets, and part of what they did, because it was an audio group, an audio theater group that was existing during the pandemic, was this notion that we don't let ourselves stay in touch with our inner kid, our inner child, and all of that space. We're so busy adulting that we don't realize that there is some wisdom in what children do and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, are there things that both of you do to try to maintain that kid-like wonderment that goes on in space? Because that was one of the things that was being advocated by IPC and Robbie and some of the others that were involved in that lane. But I do know that once you get a certain age, then all the responsibilities of the world start coming on you, and then you're like, no, I can't go out and be involved in play. But I think that play is a very important aspect of our life, both as adults and as kids. So I was wondering, how do y'all deal with that? I'm thinking that Brandon, you might even go out and play a pickup game in basketball every once in a while. Oh, you have better luck than that candidate did, because I know that one of the Republican candidates got injured, even though he did manage to get on the debate floor on Wednesday and did manage to at least hold his own, at least to some degree, even though he was hurt, I think, about a day or two before, because he was playing pickup basketball and maybe he made it a too aggressive move to the lanes and everything.
Yeah. For me, it's all about staying in the gym. Gymnastics was my first love. It was that thing that, like I said, it came to me. I didn't necessarily find it. It found me. And exactly what Patricia was describing, that was something that I could do for 5, 6, 7 hours a day. And it's hard work. You're beating your body up, and I've got the surgeries and the scars to prove it, and my wrists and shoulders and everything else. But I just loved it so much that, that's one of those things I've never been willing to let go of. And I'm a big fan of, you can't pour out of an empty cup. So if you start trying to give yourself to all these other obligations and responsibilities, and you forget to do something for you, to recharge you, to rejuvenate you, to engage in that play, then at the end of the day, all those things that you're pouring out into, they're not going to receive the version of you that they deserve. They're not going to receive the best version of you. It's funny you mentioned play. I was reading, I'm a faith-based individual. I tend to identify with Christianity mostly, but I was reading through the Bhagavad Gita, which is a set of Hindu scriptures, just because I like to learn from different cultures, different sources, and see how I can integrate that information and that knowledge, and see if there's, I think if you read the same thing in 6 different places, it's probably fundamentally true. And so I was reading through the Gita the other day, and it was saying that Krishna, which is their analog for God in that story, made the world as a form of play. I think there's something really powerful in that, right? Like, creation is a product of play. Creation is not necessarily a product of being unbelievably intentional and super hard on yourself and having to get everything perfect and right. It's a product of the essence inside of you that, just when you let it loose, when you unleash that, you just play and you just do what comes natural to you, then oftentimes some very beautiful things are created. So I think it's wise to never allow that to fall too far off the priority list.
Yeah, and Burns, I'm glad that you did that and all along those lines, because one of the things, and I think it was my dad that called me and my younger brother over one time, and I think it was one of the ABC networks, it might have even been Ted Koppel or Peter Jennings, that were doing a conversation around religion and spirituality. And this was before some of the current wars that have definitely involved that religious lane had taken place. But it was what they found when they looked at the different religions, and I think they looked at Eastern and Western religions, was that the core principles are the same. It is a lot of times the folks that are the extremes that are the ones that we hear too much about and everything. But it doesn't matter whether it's Muslim or Islam, or whether it is Christianity, or whether it's Hindu, or whether it's even Yoruba religions. It is usually about loving thy neighbor, kind of like working as a unity together, definitely understanding that nature is part of what is going on, and a lot of other kind of core principles, including the love of the parents and love of the other humanity and everything. But the core principles, and I can name some other ones, are generally very much the same, no matter what the religion is. And I find that is very true. And I've even had a guest on that was talking about, I guess, their vision when they had their out of the body experience, and they said that they saw people of different denominations when they went up in heaven. Now, some of them might have been in different parts of the heaven, but they were all in the same room. And that's kind of my philosophy and my belief. And there might be others that watch that have that my way or the highway kind of mentality, but I personally think that whenever we make that journey, that we're going to see a lot of folks up there that we might be surprised to see, because we were thinking that our way was going to be the only way. But I personally think that there'll be a lot of people that were living a positive life and trying to make change in life in general, kind of what you alluded to earlier, Brandon. But hey, I'm not in a rush to get there. It could happen, at any point and everything. But that's just my philosophy, is that it will probably be a lot of folks that had shared values.
Yeah. I think absolute thinking about issues of that level of depth and magnitude is a sign of the unwise.
Yes.
I think if people were to say, well, it's exactly this way and here's how it is, you've never been there. You don't know. None of us know for sure. And so if we start making really absolute statements like that, it's probably evidence of a lack of depth and nuance with some of those issues. But I am in complete agreement with what you just said there. I think it's going to be a lot of people that look very different, talk very different, believe different things. But as long as it's based on that fundamental web of truth, I think it's going to work out for everybody in the end.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. One of the things that I love to hear both of your thoughts, Brandon, but even Patricia as well, that there are a lot of folks that are going into the coaching space, and it seems like everybody has a coach for everything, and definitely you got to have a coach to be successful. There is no successful player. Michael Jordan had a coach, and even his coach had a coach, and all in that space. But I do know that sometimes people are seeing all these different coaches and are going like, wow, there's a lot of coaches out there. Is the field become too packed with coaches, and is every good coach, is every coach a good coach? And how would you help people get their coaching and all along those lines? Because I do know a lot of folks are hearing about the different types of coaches, whether it's a health coach, whether it's a business coach, whether it's a life coach, and we could go on down the line as to the various coaches that you can have. And at what point should everybody go out? And I know there used to be memes with people walking around with 10 coaches behind them and everything. And is that a actuality? Is that we're going to get to the point where everybody's literally got 10 coaches walking behind them and whispering in their ears the different aspect of their life that they are trying to address?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that one just because that's a big part of what we do. Actually, this t-shirt that I have on right now, this is a company that I co-direct that certifies life coaches. Funny enough that you brought that up. Not all coaches are good coaches. Let's start there. Not all coaches are good coaches. Absolutely not. You've got to do your due diligence. You've got to figure out if these people have a track record. You've got to figure out if they have a history. You got to figure out if they have either done it themselves, whatever they're trying to teach you, have they done it themselves, or have they taught other people to do it successfully, right? The reason I introduced that caveat is because the best gymnastics coach that I have ever known, he did not go to the Olympics. He never made a world team. He never made a national team. He was never that good of an athlete. By far and away the best coach I ever knew. And he sent multiple people to national teams and world championships teams. So either they've had to have done it themselves, or they have to have a track record of doing that for other people. So you got to do your due diligence. Not all coaches are good coaches. It's a very hot niche right now. It's a hot industry right now. So you got to be careful out there. Does everybody need a coach? 100%. But it doesn't have to look like what you think it looks like, right? If you want to shorten your development curve, then you absolutely need a coach. You need somebody who's been there, done that, who can see the things that you do not yet see. It's not a matter of, oh, I have all this willpower and I'm an action taker and I'm not afraid of failure and I'm going to push my way through it. It's not even about that. It's just the fact that they can remove obstacles before you're even conscious of the fact that they exist in the first place, right? Because they've been down that path and that road before. So you do need a coach. Do you necessarily have to pay somebody that you found on Instagram to coach you? Sometimes, yeah, that can be beneficial, but not always, right? I have people in my life that, for example, Eric Thomas, he is one of those people that for me, he is a faith mentor, right? Now I happen to work with him as well, but that's the person I go to that, hey, in this category, that is the most spiritual individual that I know. I'm going to go to you if I have a question about that. There's other people that I know who are just phenomenal with relationships. Like they've been married for 30 plus years. They're incredible when it comes to communication. I go to them for that issue, right? Or for that challenge if something comes up in my life. So the way I think about it is, should you have 10 coaches? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on your bank account. Depends on where you're trying to go, right? But you should have a board of advisors in your life. Absolutely. You need one for every major part of your life. You need somebody who can help you with fitness, somebody who can help you with faith, who can help you with finances, somebody who can help you with family and relationships. And then any other major pillars of your life that you find important, you should have a mentor or somebody that you can reach out to there as well, who has traveled the path that you are trying to go down and can offer some insight and some advice.
No, I definitely agree with you. Hey, Patricia, another word that a lot of people use a lot in this day and time, we heard it used a lot during the pandemic and everything, and I actually consider myself part of this group that I am going to mention and everything. But is empathy being used as a buzzword and a code word? Because I definitely think of myself as being empathetic, but I also hear people that are using the term, and sometimes I'm going like, well, that doesn't sound overly empathetic in the way that you are structuring the
Yeah.
conversation
No,
and all in
no,
that space.
I mean, it's yeah, it is heavily used. It's heavily used in my industry, but it's coming down to how they present themselves, and it's actions. I always believe actions actually illustrate more than what words say. And so someone can actually use the word, but it's actually their actions that is a real true indicator of a person. But I just want to go back to what you were talking about, our coaches, and what Brendan was saying. And I think you're spot on, Brendan, and especially about having someone, sorry, Mark, I'm going backwards on this one, but basically you saying having someone for all the different areas of your life, I think is really important. And even in my book, I don't use the word coach. I actually use the word mentor. And the thing is, one of the things that I notice with people is that they will go to someone with an issue and they have the same issue in their own life. So it's really important that if you want to actually do well, like finances, you don't go to your uncle who is, who's got credit card debts. You actually source someone who's actually traveled the road and who is successful and who can assist you in that area. It could be with fitness as well. You don't go to someone who's, chugging down burgers when you're trying to lose weight for advice. So so I just wanted to say, Brendan, you're spot on about really getting someone around, for all the different areas in your life, because that's really important.
So wait a minute, Patricia, you mean that every time that I get that chicken or I drink that iced tea and I'm doing that lifting of the cup, that is not a form of exercise? I was trying to get it as a form of exercise and all along those lines. And you just shattered my whole belief system.
No, I'm not trying to shout.
Exactly. It
No,
was
no.
a curl, the
But what I
curl
am
of the drink.
No, but
Yes,
what I
yes.
am saying is yeah, it's really important. Like if you do have a real struggle in an aspect of your life that you want to address, is actually look for and the thing is, it could be someone or it could be someone you pay, but you're actually looking for someone who is an illustration of that success, who's walked the path, who knows the struggles, and they will actually shorten that trip for you if you connect with someone to basically be a mentor or a coach. That's all I was saying.
No, I understood what you were saying. I just had to make a slight joke about that and all along those lines. I was going to ask you earlier because I was wondering, because I know that you're a producer as well and you've done work in the audiovisual and video production side. And I had asked earlier, Brandon, about the importance of athletes using their art form to make statements. And I definitely think that we are seeing that even with entertainers as well. So the question I have for you is, are we going to see a movie version of Kites and All Things Living in Life? And if Hollywood gets off a strike, will you take a call from Hollywood if they won't make said movie and all
well,
along
well,
those
well,
lines?
Well, if they came knocking on my door, absolutely. I mean, like my background is video production, and it was more to do around educational and instructional titles. And with the Mindful Space Initiative, I'm doing all the meditation series myself and getting it produced in the States anyway. But yeah, if someone came knocking on the door to get Kites and All Things produce, I would be absolutely having a chat with them about it. So yes.
So all opportunities, and it doesn't even have to be that industry. I'm sure that since you're in Australia, if Bollywood or Nollywood wanted to come knocking, you would exercise a conversation with them as well. Since I know that those are the other two that are very strong, even though I understand Britain and even Australia have a strong film community as well. So if anybody's listening that
Yeah.
is part of those communities and wants to make this into a movie, I don't think that there will be any argument from Patricia and everything. And since it's a male character, maybe we could get Brandon to play the lead role at
We
all
could
in
get
that space.
Brandon.
I'm here for it. I'm here.
Sounds
See,
good.
I'm already arranging it already. So we just got to get Hollywood to listen. Brandon will play the lead role. You'll produce it. We got everything going on in that space. So I think we've got a little
Mark.
conversation that could go on.
Mark, you can narrate it. We got half the cast right here.
Hey, we've got it together. Narration. That's right. We've got it already put together and all along those lines. Hey, one question I had, and it actually comes down to mindset and mental health, is how do we deal with, because I know, and I kind of alluded to it before, whether it's in jobs or whether it's in life, whether it's in our own family, there are folks that have various levels of toxicity, whether that is narcissism, whether that is ego, whether that is a number of other things. And there are folks that we can divorce ourselves from. Like I said, if you're in a bad relationship, you can divorce yourself from your wife and everything. But there are sometimes that you can't always divorce because family, you're kind of stuck with them for life. You don't have to see them as much if they're having some negative aspects in your life and everything. But they are family until forever because they came in with you as part of your family. And I would argue that even some of your corporate environments, the toxicity that you have to deal with is not going to cause you to leave the job because I guess you can avoid the toxic people, hopefully, but there are some jobs that might be better than the level of toxicity that you have to put up with and all in that space. So I just wondering, how do you deal with those kind of situations? Because I think that that's part of the mental health thing. Like, you can't always, I know the narrative is that you can divorce all of these folks, but some of them are not as easy to divorce as others.
Yeah. I mean, from a family situation, I mean, like, I don't have anyone in my family to be able to give you a really good answer. It's in the sense that I don't actually have someone in my family that I can go, oh geez, I can't deal with this person. I don't know. Like, the way I look at it, like, if it's family, say something. Talk to them. They may not like it, and it may cause some arguments to begin with, but I think, in family, you should be able to speak up and let them know how they're presenting themselves, that it may be quite offensive to other people. Because I think if you don't say anything, they just continue on, and they don't know. It's like a lack of awareness for some, and I think sometimes you just need to speak up. But in a work environment, I'm very fortunate where I work. It's the company I work for is called Jobco Employment Services, and they've actually created a very nurturing, safe space. And so I think that if there's any time there is an issue, anyone can actually, bring that up with their lead manager to actually address the matter. So I feel like I'm in a safe space with work. If it was a family situation, I'm not in that situation, but if it was a family situation, I would be encouraging people to just have a chat with that person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Brandon, along those same lines, I know that one of the big factors that we all deal with, and like you said, I've been doing narration and communications for years and decades, so I definitely think that I'm pretty good in that aspect of communications. But I do know that all kinds of matters of disturbances in society are revolved around miscommunication, whether that is spouses, whether that is siblings, whether that is a number of other things. So what can we do to make sure that we are actually addressing the fact that we oftentimes, even though we are very talkative people and a very communication and communal kind of society that we oftentimes don't talk enough to each other. I mean, I've been in entire rooms, and I'm sure you have as well, there in the Midwest, even restaurants where they're having entire conversations with everybody else, but the ones that are right there in their own space, because they're all on their different devices having these various conversations while they're actually in the restaurant together. And I've definitely seen that a number of times. So I was just wondering, what is your thoughts around how we can do better on the communication side as a world society, not just a United States society?
Well, I think there's two things. First and foremost, you got to understand the importance of it, and you have to become intentional about ensuring that you are conscious of the importance of it, right? And this is a huge problem with my generation specifically. I'm 26, and so almost everybody that is of around my age, we're on our phones all the time, right? And it's a beautiful thing because you can use that device to put your message out there, to become financially free. I mean, it's amazing what social media has offered us. But at the same time, when you do not have your finger on the pulse of that, sometimes your phone can use you instead of you using it. Right. And so I think the first step is just to become very intentional about how am I going to remind myself every day to connect with other human beings? How am I going to remind myself every day that the people that are around me and in front of me, that's probably more important, at least for the next 60 seconds, than whatever's happening on my phone, right? And I think putting those systems in our life, we can't hope that we think of it in the moment. We can't hope that we get to the restaurant and because we thought about it one time 3 years ago that, oh, I really should pay more attention to the people that I'm speaking to and communicating with, that when I get to the restaurant today, after having had that thought years ago, that I will somehow miraculously remember it and then be very intentional about my communication and connecting with other people. It's not how it works. You've got to set up a system in your life to constantly and continuously remind yourself to be intentional and to be deliberate about that communication. The second thing is I really think that we've got to put ourselves in each other's shoes a little bit more often. You know, I always give the example when it comes to communication that, let's just say, for example, Mark, you speak French and Patricia, you speak Spanish. And Mark, for whatever reason, you have this idea that French is the only language that should be spoken. It's the correct language. It's the right one. And everybody ought to be speaking French. And shame on you if you don't. Well, if you even want to communicate that thought or that idea to Patricia, you can't do it in French because you can sit there and yell and scream at her all day long. She's not going to understand you because she doesn't speak French. She speaks Spanish. So to even have a hope at bridging that gap, you have to learn how to speak Spanish, right? And so obviously all of us here speak English, but just because we speak the same language does not mean that we speak the same language, because we have our own perceptions, we have our own life experiences, we have our own cultures, right? Our own instilled belief systems and ideas and thoughts about the world and reality. And so I might say something and I know what I meant by it, but it could come across completely different to either of you based on your perception of that, right? And so I think we could avoid a lot of these trivial miscommunications by just saying, okay, communication is not the goal. Comprehension is the goal. How can I learn how to speak the other person's language? What's important to them? How do they see the world? How do they view things? How are they approaching this situation? Once I can understand that and truly go back to that word that you mentioned earlier, Mark, empathy, how can I truly be empathetic in the truest sense of the word by putting myself in the other person's shoes, seeing the world through the lens through which they see the world? If I can learn to speak your language, chances are I can communicate with you a heck of a lot better. And if I'm intentional about it, going back to point number one, if I can combine those two things, I think we got a shot at some effective communication.
You sure you're only 26? You sound like a 50-year-old. And definitely, I remember when I was 26 and all along those lines, there was this notion of the old soul. So I'm thinking that you've actually been here before and all along those lines, because there's definitely that notion of an old soul. I remember when I was in my 20s and 30s that they said that I had an old soul at that time. And so now that I'm 61, I'm going, does that mean I have an older soul? Or is it just, how does that whole thing work at all in that space? But definitely I was going like, I'm not sure that he's actually 26, because he definitely has some wisdom that a lot of our young folks need to be listening to and all along those lines. But along those same lines, do you sometimes get concerned about I know of Eric Thomas, I don't know him the way that you do because you're his agent and all in that space, but you concerned that sometimes we are not listening enough to both generations? Because I sometimes know that even in the political circles, and I got some friends that are part of a local PAC, that sometimes the young folks are not listening to those that are in the 50 and 60 set, but I also know that some wisdom can come down from the young folks as well. So I sometimes think that the older folks need to learn from the young people as well. But I sometimes think that we get caught in these generational divides and aren't listening enough to each other and learning from each other. But Eric is a young 26-year-old motivational speaker. What is your thoughts around that? Are there folks both in your age range as well as older that you are learning from as well? Because I wish that we had more of these generational kind of conversations.
Yeah. I think too many people focus on being right instead of what's right. And I think that you can learn from everybody. I think that no matter who you are, you have experienced something somewhere along your path that is valuable to everybody else. And I think that everybody should be brave enough to share it. And I think that everybody should be brave enough to listen and to do the best they can to integrate what other people have to say into their own worldviews. Going back to the Gita that I was reading, it said something along the lines of true enlightenment is learning to see you and everyone in you, or something along those lines. I'm probably misquoting it slightly, but that's very, very true. If you go to somebody and you just say, oh, well, he's old, he doesn't know anything, he doesn't know what he's talking about, then you're neglecting the portion of his spirit, of his consciousness that you share as well, right? This is a very old idea psychologically too. Jungian psychologists talk about the collective unconscious. There's a part of us that is very, very real, that is a true product of thousands and thousands of years of shared collective experiences. And we hold on to that. That's a physical, it's a real thing. And we hold on to that in our deep subconscious, So when somebody speaks, it's in very many ways, in I think the truest way possible, it's you speaking and it's also God speaking. And I think that by turning a deaf ear to that shows a massive amount of arrogance. And I think that it stonewalls your own progress in life, no matter if you are the older person who refuses to listen to the younger generation or vice versa. I don't think that is a wise decision if progress and development is truly the goal. If being right is the goal, and being solid in what you think is correct, or in trying to debate, then maybe that's the best thing to do. But if growth is the goal, then I don't think I can support it.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. I was also wondering, like I said, we've got just a few more minutes, and then it's a question that I ask everybody at the end of just about every interview, including how they can be reached, and we'll get to that very shortly. But how many of us are actually, whether they are 16 or 66 or 96, are actually understanding what our life goals are and are actually pursuing our life goals and all in that space? Because I know here in the West, a lot of people go through the motion of life. They go through their jobs, they go through things, but I don't know that they are necessarily going through it with intention, because we've talked about intention quite a bit on this show and everything. So I'm wondering, how many people do you feel are actually going through life pursuing their true life goals and even having an understanding of what their life mission, life understanding is, and all in that space? Because I do think that there is a notion that, whether it was the pandemic or even before the pandemic, that a lot of folks are going, and I hate to use this term because it sounds off almost science fiction like and everything, but going through almost like a zombie like existence and all into that space. But I just wondering, how is y'all's observations, and whether you feel that I'm onto something, and that more people need to have a better understanding of who they are and where they are going in their life.
I actually think people, a lot of people are pursuing careers. Others are just doing a job. But the very limited people are sort of focusing on their true vision, or something that they are hiding from everyone else. They don't want to voice it. And I think it all comes down to giving yourself enough time to yourself to discover that. We fill our life with so many distractions that it all this noise doesn't allow you to actually pierce, this scene and see what is actually there for you. And I think a lot of people are filling their life with their phones. They're on Facebook. They're on watching telly. I don't think they're giving themselves that time to get to know themselves, that intimate time that I think is really important. We spend a lot of time focusing on how we plan a holiday and all those sort of things, but we don't spend enough time planning to spend some time with ourselves.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything, and that definitely went from you as well, Brandon. But I was just thinking to myself, so you mean that maybe watching the Same episode of CSI Miami or Bones for the 8th time isn't really doing a lot for my life goal, since I could probably memorize the lines and tell you exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and all in that space.
No, I'm not telling.
That.
No, I'm not telling you can't watch your telly. What I am saying is just finding that time to spend some time with yourself, to get to know yourself. I think some people are scared of themselves. That's why they keep filling it up with things. So I think, when you actually start spending some time on your own and getting to know yourself, you realize how wonderful you are.
Oh, I definitely agree with you, but I'm gonna let Brandon speak as well. But yeah, I was literally doing that just yesterday because I was watching an episode, and I think that I realized I had seen that episode 3 times, and I'm going like, I think that at this point I pretty much know what's gonna happen. That's it, and I know when it's gonna happen. So yeah, but at that time you have to like start reconsidering and being like, no, I've seen that episode enough times. If you can memorize the lines and know when it's gonna happen, then it might be time to turn off the TV.
Well, I think Patricia just absolutely nailed it. When you spend enough time with yourself, you start to realize how wonderful you really are. And I think that's very, very true over a long enough time horizon, right? Unfortunately, in the short term, what a lot of us do is when we spend 5 minutes with ourselves instead of 5 years with ourselves, we tend to pick out the negatives. We tend to pick out the insufficiencies or the shortcomings and where we fall short. And I think that's why a lot of people are so afraid of spending time with themselves, is because they're afraid to confront the potential that they have within themselves that they have yet to actualize, that they have yet to do anything with, right? And those are the things that stick out to us the most because we are self-critical beings by nature. And it's not necessarily a bad thing because that reveals the gaps between the current reality and the potential that we have. And understanding where those gaps are is a beautiful thing because it means that you can work towards it every day. You can wake up with a mission and a purpose to try and close those gaps. And it's actually a really empowering thing if you think about it that way. But unfortunately, many of us, we run away from that feeling. And a lot of us fill it with busy work, whether it be work, or some of us fill it with vices. You fill it with alcohol or drugs, or you fill it with whatever else. And I think that allowing yourself a little bit of space to feel that and to explore who you are is a really, really important thing. And I also think that, begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey, think about what's your obituary going to say? What are people going to say about you? I remember this wasn't that long ago, Mark. It was maybe 3-4 years ago. One of my coaches who was with me for many, many years as I was coming up in the sport of gymnastics during my teenage years, he passed away from stage 4 colon cancer. And this was right towards the tail end of the pandemic. And he lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I used to travel. I'm from Alabama originally. So when you were talking about hurricanes and tornadoes in the beginning, I was like, yes, I 100% get that. Having grown up in the South, we had tornadoes all the time. But he lived in Chattanooga. So it was about 3.5 hours away. And we used to make that drive. My mom would literally get in the car, and I was homeschooled, so we had the time, thankfully. But she would get in the car and drive me 3.5 hours each way to go train at this guy's gym because he would train me and let me train with his team for free. And we didn't have the money, for a lot of these lessons. Gymnastics is an expensive sport. We didn't grow up with means like that. And so he let me train out there. And I'm telling you, he was the definition of impactful over impressive. I mean, I've worked with coaches that have coached the Olympic team before, and they weren't able to get me to do half the stuff that this guy was able to get me to do. And he didn't have a super impressive resume, but he was able to get me through a lot of these mental blocks. He was able to get me to believe in myself in many ways for the first time. And he had such a profound impact on my life. And when he passed away, the widow, the wife, she gave me a call and she said, I know you're going to want to come down here and everything, but it's going to be a closed funeral because of COVID restrictions, because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I was like, what are you talking about? The pandemic's pretty much over. A lot of places have opened back up again. You're in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. I know for sure that you don't have some of these restrictions. You don't have restrictions on large gatherings. And I thought about it for a little bit, and I realized that if that had been an open funeral, I can pretty much guarantee you that there would have been thousands of people there, because if you were a gymnast in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, any of the surrounding areas, if you were a gymnast between 1980 and 2020 in the Southeastern Conference, you probably knew who this guy was. And I'm willing to bet that he had a profound impact on a lot more than just me, because he treated everybody that way. He did a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier in the show. He was very intentional. He was very deliberate. He connected before he corrected. He was very intentional about treating every single athlete as an individual, not using a shotgun approach. He was a true leader in the truest sense of the word. And because of that, he made such a profound impact that funeral would have been packed out, it probably would have gotten shut down by the authorities, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it would benefit a lot of us to really think about, am I getting caught up in the whirlwind of day-to-day actions, of day-to-day going through the motions, of going to work, spending a couple of time, spending a few minutes with the kids, having dinner at night, and then that's it. You wake up, do it all again tomorrow. Are we getting into motions and routines of behavior, or are we being intentional? There's that word again, about the way that we want to live our lives and the impact that we want to leave. And I think if you fast forward to that moment and say, well, what are people going to say about me when I'm gone? Am I going to have an impact or a message that's going to outlive me? Are there going to be thousands of people showing up to the point where they got to shut it down? Or is it going to be something where, maybe not too much time was lost? I think thinking about that ahead of time is, again, it's a sign of doing something with your life that is worth remembering. And I think if more people were on that path, like you don't have the temptation to go smoke and drink when you are on a path of purpose. Like when you really feel like you're onto something that you were put here to do, that it is an obligation from above, you're expected to execute with excellence. When you believe that for real, like in your heart, you don't fall prey to a lot of the trappings that most people fall into. You see, we've all seen these people that we say they've all had they had so much potential. They were going to be the next so-and-so. They could have been so great and amazing. And then they fall victim to either just meaninglessness in their own lives or a vice of some sort, or they get caught up in a job that they don't really like, And it's like, those are the people that I think things like this and the work that you both are doing, I think that's what this needs to do, is get into the mental ecosystem of those individuals and just wake them up a little bit. Because if more people were on that path of purpose and really reaching for their calling and their potential, I think the world would end up being a lot better place, because so many more people would contribute so much more to society.
And definitely that. And not only that, but people would not get caught up in some of the materialistic things. So I know that even we talked about this earlier, even in the relationship space, that sometimes people are so caught up with what the person's status is, what their job is, what their car is, what kind of house they live in, and a number of other things. And sometimes that isn't the true core of the person. So like you were just saying, Brandon, you got to get to know the people, but sometimes we get too caught up in the outer workings of what they are doing and all in that space. And at the end of the day, those are status symbols, and they're not necessarily the core of the individual. Not saying that you can't have a nice car if that's something you want. I mean, my brother drives around with a slingshot and is a member of the slingshot club, which I like to call those Batmobile cars, and all along those lines, and definitely has a nice vehicle. And I have some friends that have some pretty decent housing and everything, and definitely have some friends with some decent jobs, but I also know some friends that are quote unquote blue collar workers, and some of them do better than the doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs that are supposed to be the quote unquote better status jobs, and all along those lines. So we definitely got to look at the inner core of the people and what they are all about, and there come back to empathy and understanding who they are at the core. And if they got problems, then you can work to address it. I know that I can be more of an Oscar than a Felix, so I've definitely had to deal with that on occasion, and have definitely had friends that have noticed that and have given me advice. But that's just something that we are always working on, is ways to improve ourselves as well. So if you got those Oscar moments, and you just try to find ways to improve those Oscar moments, and all along those lines, and or either that, or you can just tell folks it's my space, it's my property, and if you're not going to deal with my messiness, then you don't need to be here. So I've also had people that have had that mindset as well. But I think that we can all do self-improvement, because that's part of what I know that Patricia, you're all about, is self-improvement, and all along those lines. So understanding what our weaknesses are and trying to work to better those weaknesses if we can make improvements on them. Now, some of the weaknesses come with our mental health and our physical health, and we can't always address all of the weaknesses that we have, because some of them may be things that are you're born with. I'll just put it that way, and that you just have to cope with and adapt to, and all along those lines. Hey, Brandon, really quick, and then I'm going to, like I said, wrap up very shortly, and all in that space. Alabama or Auburn, because I have a church that used to meet at Haytas, that Cultural Arts Center was one, and there were two ministers. I think they're still the ministers of Christ Central, and one came from Alabama, the other came from Auburn. They managed to maintain a church, and I think they've been maintaining that church for about 4 or 5 years. And of course, the rivalry does come up in their sermons and all in that space, and it's been a minute since they left our Hayti Center and moved to a different educational venue where they also was attached to a church where they are now holding service. But I know that there's a big rivalry between Alabama and Auburn. So which side of the aisle did you fall on?
Okay, so here's the thing. First and foremost, Michigan, go blue. That's where my allegiance lies because that's my alma mater, right? That's where the true allegiance lies. I was born and raised an Auburn fan. It was an Auburn household through and through. In my heart, I still root for Auburn. Publicly, if you see me out in the world somewhere and and Alabama's playing a game on the TV, I will root for them just because they actually win stuff. Auburn never wins anything. Alabama actually wins, so I'm a fair weather fan of Alabama. But if it's Auburn, Alabama, Iron Bowl, War Eagle.
I got you. You're going to go with Auburn if there's that rivalry. And all along those lines, Patricia's going like, I don't know what they're talking about. We do soccer and we do cricket.
Football. Baseball, isn't it? Oh, I got it completely wrong.
That was actually football. That was football. The Alabama and
Football.
Auburn, but
Okay,
it's
sorry.
a basketball rivalry as well.
Right, American football,
Okay.
not even football the way the rest of the world says it, but American football.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that Patricia might be over there trying to root for it because I know there's a heavy cricket population there in that area as well as some heavy rugby. So I'm thinking that you might be.
Yeah, and we got AFL as well. So yeah, so we got Australia's a bit of a sporting nation, and so even though I'm not big on sports, but yeah, there's a lot of shining stars in our sporting field. So yeah.
Y'all definitely had some shining stars. I remember that the woman that was running against FloJo, and I can't think of her name right now, but she was definitely one of the track icons that was a Aborigine, if I'm remembering correctly, but I'm just not thinking of her name off the top of my head. But I know that she was definitely a rival to FloJo and a number of others in the Olympic movement and all in that space.
Kathy Freeman.
That's the one. Thank you. I knew if you said I would remember it. Yes, Miss Freeman, yeah. Kathy Freeman.
Yeah, she was amazing athlete. Yeah, and an amazing athlete.
Yeah, she's definitely an amazing athlete and all along those lines. Like I said, Gary, to wind down, this has been a fun conversation. I hope that both of y'all will come back at some point and all along those lines. Patricia, you do have another book that is going to come out, and I'm loving the title, but I'm wondering, what is an iconic inner self? And do we all have an iconic inner self? And when is that coming out?
No, Iconic Inner Self is the working title for my app. And so when is it going to come out? I'm still sort of tweaking, and I mean the thing is, I could just release it now, but I'm still. I think an aspect of myself is being a bit of a perfectionist, but I'm thinking of when it does come out, it will go either on the Apple Store and Google Store. So it's not far off. It's the fact that I'm just still tweaking it. So yeah.
I definitely appreciate it. Hey,
Brad, that's the working title, Iconic Inner Self. But once I settle on the name, it could still be that name. But once I settle on the name, I mean, it will be official on the website. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We've been talking for about 2 hours, and I hope that I can get y'all back on in the near future. And I definitely think we have given some great insights and some great conversation to the listening audience. And of course, this does air several times. Both it airs live while we are talking on Pod TV, but it also airs several times both on Pod TV and on LinkedIn, Facebook, and a number of other locations during the course of several weeks and all in that space. So folks will get a chance to watch it in rerun as well. And of course, I usually post about it on Instagram and a couple of other sources as well. But one thing I get all of my guests to do, and that's where I was getting to as we were wrapping up and coming to the end, is if folks can tell how they can be reached, where they can be found, if folks have found value in our conversation, and if they would like to learn more about what we've been talking about and about your own individual works and all in that space. And then, like I said, one of the things that I do is kind of like my own personal mission, because I do believe that it is a very difficult world that we're living in, and we're going through all kinds of issues and things around those lines. So I try to get all my guests to give a message of positivity and hope for the entire global community. So I think that I'll Let's see, we'll go ladies first again. So I'll start with you, Patricia. If you could tell folks how they can reach you and any message of positivity and hope that you would like to share with our global audience as we are heard, not just there in Australia and the United States, but around the world in various countries. I think the last count I'd heard was something like 175 countries at different points and times, sometimes as many as 200. But that being said, if you can tell folks how they can reach you, any message of positivity and hope that you would
Sure,
like to share.
sure. Um, Firstly, if someone wants to get in contact with me, go to themindfulspaceinitiative.com, and I have contact forms on two sections of the website where you can actually drop me a message. A message to the world. May your life be filled with magic and wonder. And one of the things that we were talking about is vision and the whole thing. And one of the things is getting from here and focusing on your vision. And if you reframe your language from I need to, I should do this or whatever, to I get to do this, it's amazing because you move from this feeling of um, having to do something to having this childlike, curious approach to things. So just reframing it and just saying, I get to do this, I get to do that, I get to write this report. And when you say it like that, it is you then realize you're getting to share some information with people. So to get to that vision is just reframe your language and use the word I get to do. And it becomes curious approach and you become extremely grateful for the things that you start doing.
No doubt about that and everything. Hey, Brandon, if you could tell folks how they can reach you and also how they can definitely message of hope and positivity that you would like to share as well. Because definitely I do believe that anything we can do to improve the world is a wonderful thing and all along those lines. And then after you do that, we'll close out with a friend spice line because they've got a healthy spice line that'll be the PSA that we will use to get on out of here, as well as another friend's voiceover commercial. So that we'll use both of those to get on out of here and in that space. But definitely, Brandon, it's been a great pleasure to talk to both you and Patricia. And like I said earlier, I hope that both of you will make a return trip and all along those lines. But Brandon, it's on you.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, really, really appreciate you, Mark, just for having both of us on. Patricia, appreciate you being here and sharing this space with me. It's been super, super fun and impactful. So thank you so much. Thank you for everybody that's been watching this. We can't do what we do without y'all. So appreciate y'all as well. I am B Burns is everything. That's IAMBBURNS. IamBburns.com is the website. I am B Burns on every social media you can think of: LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, all of it. So try and keep it all as one thing. Just keep it simple. In terms of a message, man, everything your hands find to do with all your might. Try as hard as you can. Don't let people talk you out of your dreams, your visions. It's yours. It's not for them. It was meant for you. It was given to you for a reason, for a purpose. Don't ever doubt that. And don't ever allow doubt, fear, negativity, other people's opinions to convince you to try less than what you're capable of. You have a certain amount of potential that's within you, whether you think you do or not, whether you think that you are just the lowest of the low and there's nothing that you can offer. I promise you that's not true. I can promise you that you're loved, that you're valued, that you're cared for, and that you're worth it. And if you just simply do everything that your hands find to do, whatever is in front of you, whatever is right in front of you right now, maybe it's right now, maybe today it's a minimum wage job, do it with all your might. Right now, maybe it's something that you don't want to be doing. Maybe right now it's something that you don't care about. Do it with all your might. I started scrubbing toilets. Do it with all your might. Do it the best that you possibly can, and take something that you heard today and put it into action. Don't listen to it and say, "Oh, that's deep, that's good," and then not change something. But don't let somebody say you heard me speak and then you didn't change nothing. You said, "Oh, that's really deep. That makes a lot of sense." And you didn't change your life because of it. Go execute, go make a change, and go be who you were created to be.
No doubt about that. Like I said, we're getting ready to get out of here with those commercials and all along those lines. You actually just paraphrased a quote to some degree from Dr. Martin Luther King, and today is actually the anniversary of his March on Washington. But I know that he said that if you're going to be a garbage man, be the best garbage man that you can be, and all along those lines. So that was one of his great quotes, and it was definitely a very much of an influence to a number of people, myself included, that heard that speech, as well as a number of other speeches that Dr. King gave. And like I said, this is the 60th anniversary. Today being August 28th was the day that he did that speech in 1963. So I was literally all of 1 year old at that particular time that he was doing that speech. And now I'm 61. And I think that the message still resonates today, even though it was made that time ago and all in that space. So on that note, we're going to get ready to get on out of here. Like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully y'all don't get too hungry hearing about these can-do spices and also hearing about the voiceover work that Karen Bradford does. But I know most people, when they see the can-do spice commercial, are like, hey, I got to rush out and get me some can-do spices. Those look like they might be too dangerous and too good and all along those lines. So we're going to get on out of here with those two commercials kind of moments and all in that space. But I do look forward to seeing both of you in the not too distant future and on the various social platforms as well.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Brandon.
How people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements, but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends, so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can-Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can-Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can-Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can-Do Spice a try.
The only trick you need to save time and money is to shop at Aldi. Aldi. Shop differently. Limitless length plus volume. Sensational from every angle. New Lash Sensational Sky High Mascara. Only from Maybelline, New York. Everything that touches your baby should be this comforting. Pampers Swaddlers. The #1 choice of hospitals is 2 times softer. All right, Trivago. Find me a hotel somewhere in Thailand where I can wake up with a view of the ocean. Awesome. The future. It's impossible to see. And when it's finally here, it might not be what you'd expect. It might just be better. Introducing Luxury Electric. Introducing Lucid Air. We're for those who love to discover, who don't need to travel to find something new, and who know when you spend less, you can discover even more at TJ Maxx and Marshalls. Smooth, velvety chocolate wrapped in precious gold. Ferrero Rocher.